You want? I'm starting another video. You want to show the flashlight?
I picked it up. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll be reading one book out of Christmas with Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens. The story of the goblins who stole a sexton. In an old abbey town down in this part of the country a long, long while ago, so long that the story must be a true one, because our great-grandfathers immediately implicitly believed it, there are officiated as sexton and gravedigger in the churchyard, one Gabriel Grubb. It by no means follows that because a man is a sexton and constantly surrounded by emeralds of immortality, therefore he should be a morose and melancholy man. Your undertakers are the merriest fellows in the world, and I, for once, had the honor of being on immediate terms with a mute who in private life and off duty was a comical and jocose little fellow as ever chipped out a devil-may-care song without a hitch in his memory or drained off a good stiff glass of grog without stopping for breath. But notwithstanding those precedents to the contrary, Gabriel Grubb was an ill-conduct, cross-grained, surly fellow, a morose and lonely man who consorted with nobody but himself and an old wicker bottle which fitted into his long, deep waistcoat pocket, and who eyed each merry face as it passed by him with such a deep scowl of malice and ill humour as if it was difficult to meet without feeling something the worse for. A little before twilight one Christmas Eve, Gabriel shouldered his spade, lighted his lantern, and betook himself towards the old churchyard, for he had got a grave to finish by next morning. And feeling very low, he thought it might raise his spirits perhaps, if he went out on with his work at once. As he ran his way to the ancient street, he saw the cheerful light of the blazing fires gleaming through the old casements, and heard the loud laugh and the cheerful shouts of those who were assembled around them. He marked the bustling parish apartments for next day's good cheer, and smelt the numerous savory odors consequent therefore as they streamed up from the kitchen windows in clouds. All this was gall and wormwood to the heart of Gabriel Grubb, and as groups of children bounded out of the houses, tripped across the road, and were met before they could knock at the opposite door by half a dozen curly-haired little rascals who crawled around them as they flocked upstairs to spend the evening in their Christmas games. Gabriel smiled grimly and clutched the handle of his spade with a firmer grasp as he thought of a measly scarlet fever, thrust, hopping cough, and a good many other sources of constellation besides. In this happy frame of mind, Gabriel strode along, returning a short swallow growl to the good-humored greetings of such of his neighbors as now, and then passed him until he turned into the dark lane which led to the churchyard. Now Gabriel had been looking forward to reaching the dark lane because it was, generally speaking, a nice, gloomy, mournful place, into which the townspeople did not much care to go except in broad daylight and when the sun was shining. Constantly, he was not a little ignorant to hear young urchin roaming out here some jolly song about a Merry Christmas in this very sanctuary which had been called Coffin Lane ever since the days of the old abbey, in the time of the shaven-head monks. As Gabriel walked on, and the voice drew nearer, he found it proceeding from a small boy who was hurrying along to join one of the little parties in the old street, and who, partly to keep himself company, and partly to prepare himself for the occasion, was shouting out that song at the highest pitch of his lungs. So Gabriel waited until the boy came up, and then dodged him into a corner, and rapped him over the head with his letter 5 or 6 times, just to teach him to modulate his voice. And as the boy hurried away with his hand to his head, singing quite a different sort of tune, Gabriel Grubb chuckled very heartily to himself and entered the churchyard, locking the gate behind him. He took off his coat and set down his lantern, and getting into the unfinished grave, worked at it for an hour or so with right good will, but the earth was hardened with the frost, and it was not so easy to break it up and shovel it out. And although there was a moon, it was a very long young one, and shed little light upon the grave, which was in the shadow of the church. At any other time, those obstacles would have made Gabriel very moody and miserable, but he was very well pleased with having stopped the small boy singing, that he took little heed of a skinny process he had made. And he looked down into the grave when he had finished working for the night, with grim satisfaction, muttering as he grabbed up his things, "Brave lodging for one, brave lodgings for one. A few feet of cold earth when life is done, a stone at the head, a stone at the feet, a rich juicy meal for the worms to eat, rank grass overhead, and damp clay around. Brave lodgings for one, those in holy ground." "Ho, ho," laughed Gabriel Grubb as he sat himself down on a flat tombstone which was a favorite resting place for his, and drew forth his wicker bottle, "a coffin at Christmas, a Christmas box. Ho, ho, ho." "Ho, ho, ho," repeated a voice which sounded close behind him. Gabriel paused in some alarm in the act of raising the wicker bottle to his lips, and looked around. At the bottom of the oldest grave about him was not more still and quiet than the churchyard in the pale moonlight. The cold frost glistened on the tombstones and sparkled like rows of gems among the stone carvings of the old church. The snow lay hard and crisp on the ground, and spread over the thick stewed mounds of earth, so white and smooth a cover that it seemed as if corpses lay there, hidden only in their winding sheets. Not the faintest rustle broke the profound tranquility of the solemn scene. Sound itself appeared to be frozen up. All was cold and still. It was the echoes, said Gabriel Grubb, raising the bottle to his lips again. "It was not," said a deep voice. Gabriel started up, and stood rooted to the spot with astonishment and terror, for his eyes rested on a form which made his blood run cold. Seated on an uptight tombstone close to him was a strange, unearthly figure, whom Gabriel felt at once was no being of this world. His long, frantic legs, which might have reached the ground, were cocked up and crossed with a quaint fashion. His shadowy arms were bare, and his hands rested on his knees. On his short, round body he wore a clothes-covering ornament with small slashes, and a short cloak dangled at his back. The collar was cut into curious peaks, which served the goblin in lieu of ruff or neckerchief, and his shoes curled up at the toes into long points. On his head he wore a brim sugar-loafed hat garnished with a single feather. The hat was covered with the white frost, and the goblin looked as if he had sat on the same tombstone very comfortably for 200 or 300 years. He was sitting perfectly still. His tongue was put out as if derision, and he was grinning at Gabriel Grubb with such grin as only a goblin could call up. It was not the echo, said the goblin. Gabriel Grubb was paralyzed and could make no reply. What do you do here on Christmas Eve? Said the goblin sternly. I came to dig a grave, sir, stammered Gabriel Grubb. Gabriel started up and stood rooted to the spot with astonishing terror. What man wanders among graves and churchyards on such a night as this? Said the goblin. Gabriel Grubb, Gabriel Grubb, screamed a chorus of voices that seemed to fill the churchyard. Gabriel looked fearfully around. Nothing was to be seen. What have you got in that bottle? Said the goblin. Hoodlums, sir, replied the Sexton, trembling before more than ever. He had bought it out of the smugglers, and he thought that perhaps this questionnaire might be in the excuse department of the goblin. Who drinks Holland alone in the churchyard on such a night as this? Said the goblin. Gabriel Grubb, exclaimed the wild voices again. The goblin leered mysteriously at the terrified Sexton and raised his voice and exclaimed, And who, then, is our fair and lawful prize? To this inquiry, the visible chorus replied in a strain that sounded like the voice of many choristers singing to the mighty swell of an old church organ, a strain that seemed bore to the Sexton ears. Once a gentle wind was to die away as it soft breathed passed onward, but the burden of the reply was still the same. Gabriel Grubb, Gabriel Grubb. The goblin grinned a broader grin than before as he said, Well, Gabriel, what do you say to this? The Sexton gasped for breath. What do you think of this, Gabriel? Said the goblin, kicking up his feet in the air on either side of the tombstone and looking for the turned up sides with as much confidence as if he had been contemplating the most fashionable pair of Wellingtons in all Bond Street. It's very curious, sir, replied the Saxon, half dead with fright. Very curious and very pretty, but I think I'll go back and finish my work, sir, if you please. Work, said the goblin. What work? The grave, sir, making the grave, stammered the Saxon. Oh, the grave, eh? Said the goblin. Who makes graves at a time when all other men are merry and take pleasure in it? Again the merry grown voices replied, Gabriel Grubb, Gabriel Grubb. I'm afraid my friends want you, Gabriel, said the goblin, thrusting his tongue farther into his cheek than ever. In a mysterious astonished it was. I'm afraid my friends want you, Gabriel, said the goblin. Under favor, sir, replied the horror-struck Sexton. I don't think they can, sir. They don't know me, sir. I don't think the gentlemen have ever seen me, sir. Or yes, they have, replied the goblin. We know the man with the scuffle face and the grim scowl that came down the street tonight, throwing his evil looks at the children and grasping his burying spade the tighter. We know the man that struck the boy in the curious malice of his heart, because the boy couldn't be merry and he could not. We know him. We know him. Here the goblin gave a loud, shrill laugh, and the echoes returned 20-fold, and throwing his legs up in the air, stood upon his head, or rather upon the very point of his sugar loaf hat, on the narrow edge of the tombstone, from whence he threw a somersault with excitement and agility over the Saxon feet, which he planted himself in the attitude in which tailors generally sit upon a shopboard. I am afraid I must leave you, sir, said the Sexton, making an effort to move. Leave us, said the goblin. Gabriel Grubb, going to leave us? Ho, ho, ho. As the goblin laughed, the Sexton observed for one instant a brilliant illustration within the windows of the church, as if the whole building were lighting up. It disappeared. The organ pealed forth a lively air, and whole troops of goblins, the very counterpart of the first one, poured into the churchyard and began playing a leapfrog with the tombstones, never stopping for an instant to take breath, but overing the highest among them, one after the other, with the most mysterious dexterity. The first goblin was a most astonishing leaper, and none of the others could come near him. Even in the extremity of his terror, the Sexton could not help observing while his friends were content to leaping over the common-sized gravestones. The first one took the family values, iron rails and all, and as much ease as if they had been so many street posts. At least the game reached to a most exciting pitch. The organ played quicker and quicker, and the goblins leapt faster and faster, coiling themselves up, rolling head over heels upon the ground, and bounding over the tombstone like footballs. The Sexton's brain whirled around with the rapidly of the motion he beheld, and his legs reeled beneath him as the spirits flew before his eyes. And the Goblin King, suddenly darting towards him, laid his hand upon his collar and sank with him through the earth. When Gabriel Grubb had time to fetch his breath, with the rapidity of his descent had for the moment taken away, he found himself in what appeared to be a large cavern, surrounded on all sides by crowds of goblins, ugly and grim. In the center of the room, on an elevated seat, he was Sexton, his friend of the churchyard, and close beside him stood Gabriel Grubb himself without the power of motion. Cold tonight, said the king of the goblins. Very cold. A glass of something warm here. At this command, half a dozen official goblins, with a particle smile upon their face, whom Gabriel imagined to be carriers on that account, had hastily disappeared and partially returned with a goblet of liquid fire, which they presented to the king. Ah, said the goblin, whose cheeks and throat were quite transparent as he tossed down the flame. This warms one indeed. Bring a bumper of the same for Mr. Grubb. It was in the vain for unfortunate Sexton to protest that he was not in the habit of taking anything warm at night. For one, the goblins held him while another poured the blazing liquid down his throat, and the whole assembly screeched with laughter as he coughed and choked and wiped away the tears which gushed plentifully from his eyes after swallowing the burning draught. "And now," said the king, frantically poking the temper corner of his sugar-loaf hat in the Saxon's eye, and therefore causing him the most exquisite pain, "and now show the man of misery and gloom a few of the pictures from our own great storehouse." As the goblin said this, a thick cloud which observed further end of the cavern rolled gurgly away, and disclosed, apparently at a great distance, a small and scarcely furnished but neat and clean apartment. A crowd of little children were gathered around a bright fire, clinging to their mother's gown, and Graham bawling around her chair. The mother occasionally rose and drew aside the window curtain as if to look for some expected object. A fair meal was ready, spread upon the table, and an elbow chair was placed near the fire. A knock was heard at the door. The mother opened it, and the children crowded around her and clapped their hands with joy as their father entered. He was wet and weary, and shook the snow from his garments. As the children crowded around him, and seizing his cloak, cap, stick, and glove, with busy zeal ran with them from the room. Then, as he sat down to his meal before the fire, the children climbed about his knee, and the mother sat by his side. And all seemed
Sorry to interrupt. Where's my tactical shears you gave me?
in the kitchen.
All right, thank you, baby.
You're welcome. All seemed happiness and comfort. "Can you bring me my sandwich, please?"
Yeah, baby. Where is it?
"It's on the table."
All right.
But a change came upon the view, almost incredible. The scene was altered to a small bedroom where the fairies.
Here you go, baby.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Where the fairest and youngest child lay dying, the roses had fled from his cheeks, and the light from his eye. And even as the sexton looked upon him with an interest he had never felt or known before he died, his young brothers and sisters crowded around his little bed and seized his tiny hands, so cold and heavy that they shrunk back from its touch, and looked with an awe on his infant face, for calm and tranquil as it was, and sleeping in rest and peace as the beautiful child seemed to be, they saw that he was dead, and they knew that he was an angel looking down upon and blessing them from a bright and happy heaven. Again the light cloud passed across the picture, and again the subject changed. The father and mother were old and helpless now, and the number of those about them was dismaying more than half, but contented cheerfulness sat on every face and beamed in every eye as they crowded around the fireplace and told and listened to old stories of earlier and bygone days. Slowly and peacefully the father sank into the grave, and soon after the share of all his cares and troubles followed him to a place of rest and peace. The few who yet survived them knelt by their tomb and watered the green turf which covered it with their tears, then rose and turned away, sadly mournfully, but not with bitter tears or desperate lamentations, for they knew that they should one day meet again, and once more they mixed with the busy world, and their content and cheerfulness were restored. The clouds settled upon the picture and concealed it from the Sexton's view, "What do you think of that?" said the goblin, turning his large face towards Gabriel Grubb. Gabriel muttered out something about its being very pretty and looked somewhat ashamed as the goblin bent his fiery eyes upon him. "You're a miserable man," said the goblin in a tone of excessive contempt. He appeared disposed to add more, but indignation choked his utterance, so he lifted up one of his very pale legs and fluttered it above his head a little to ensure his aid, administered a good sound kick to Gabriel Grubb, immediately after which all the goblins in waiting crowd around the wretched Sexton and kicked him without mercy, according to the established and invariable customs of quarters upon earth, whom royalty kicks, and hug whom royalty hugs. "Show him some more," said the king of the goblins. At these words the cloud was again dispelled, and a rich and beautiful landscape was disclosed to view. There is just another to this day. Within half a mile of the old abbey town, the sun shone from the out of the clear blue sky. The water sparkled beneath its rays, and the trees looked greener and the flowers more gay beneath its cheering influence. The water rippled on with a pleasant sound. The trees rustled in the light wind that murmured along among their leaves. The birds sang upon the boughs, and the lark called on high her welcome to the morning. Yes, it was morning, the bright, coming morning of summer. The meanest leaf, the smallest blade of grass was inserted with life. The ant crept forth to her daily toil. The butterfly fluttered and basked in the warm rays of the sun. Myriads of insects spread their transparent wings and reveled in their brief but happy existence. Man walked forth, elated with the scene, and all was brightness and spectacular. "You, a miserable man," said the king of the goblins, in a more constant tone than before, and again the king of the goblins gave his leg a flourish. Again it descended on the shoulders of the Sexton, and again the attendant goblins imitated the example of their chief. Many a time the cloud went and came, and many a lesson it taught to Gabriel Grubb, who, although his shoulders smarted with pain from the frequent applications of the goblin's feet thereunto, looked on with an interest which nothing could dismay. He saw that men who worked hard and earned their scanty bread with lives of labor were cheerful and happy, that to the most ignorant the sweet face of nature was never failing source of cheerfulness and joy. He saw those who had been delinquent nature intentionally brought up cheerful under provocation, and superior to suffering that would have garnished many of a rougher grain, because they bore within their own bosoms the materials of happiness, content, and peace. He saw that women, the tenderness and most fragile of all of God's creatures, often superior to sorrow, vanity, and distress, and he saw that it was because they bore in their own hearts an inexhaustible wellspring of affection and devotion. Above all, he saw that men like himself, who snore at the mirth and cheerfulness of others, were the foulest weeds on the fair surface of the earth, and setting all the good of the world against the evil. he came to the conclusion that it was a very decent and respectable sort of world after all. No sooner had he formed it that the cloud which had closed over the